Have you ever been in a situation where you felt completely powerless, where one person's arbitrary decision threatened to ruin everything you've worked for? For Dr. Evelyn Reed, a leading astrophysicist on her way to change the world, that moment came at an airport boarding gate. She was carrying her life's work in a small case, a device poised to unlock secrets of the universe. But a gate agent armed with a plastic sizer and a dismissive attitude saw only a problem. He denied her, forcing her to surrender her priceless cargo to the dark belly of the plane. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that thousands of miles above them, a multi-billion-dollar eye on the cosmos was failing, and in minutes, NASA would be calling. This isn't just a story about a carry-on bag. It's a story about prejudice power and the phone call that turned a moment of humiliation into a race to save a mission to the stars. The air in Boston, Logan International Airport, was a familiar symphony of chaos. A blend of rolling luggage wheels, garbled final boarding calls, and the faint, greasy aroma of Cinnabon. To Dr. Evelyn Reed, it was merely white noise, a necessary purgatory separating her from Geneva, and more importantly, from the culmination of a decade of relentless work. Evelyn was not a physically imposing woman. She was of average height, with a lean, athletic build, honed by early morning runs along the Charles River before heading to her lab at MIT. Her hair was styled in intricate professional locks, framing a face with high cheekbones and eyes that held a deep, analytical calm. Those eyes had spent more time gazing at stellar spectra and exoplanetary transits than most people had spent watching television. At 34, she was a rising star in the notoriously demanding world of astrophysics, a field where her brilliance was undeniable, even if her presence as a black woman was still a statistical anomaly. Clutched in her right hand was the handle of a sleek black Pelican case. It was deceptively small, designed to fit the precise carry-on dimensions of most international airlines, yet it felt as heavy as a small planet. Inside, nestled within custom-cut anti-static foam, was the Stellar Atmosphere Refraction and Composition Homodyne Sensor, or SARAH, as she'd affectionately nicknamed it. SARAH wasn't just a piece of equipment. It was an extension of her mind. A revolutionary spectropolarimeter she had designed and built with her own hands, funded by a grant she had fought tooth and nail for. The device was her Excalibur. Traditional spectrographs could tell you what a distant planet's atmosphere was made of. SARAH could do that while also measuring the polarization of the light, allowing Evelyn to deduce atmospheric density, cloud particle size, and even the presence of complex organic molecules with unprecedented accuracy. It was the key to her keynote address at the International Astronomical Union Symposium in Geneva. Her presentation titled Biosignatures in TRAPPIST-1e. A new polarimetric approach was poised to send shockwaves through the scientific community. The data stored on an encrypted solid-state drive embedded within SARAH's casing was irreplaceable. It was the raw output from a targeted observation she had been allocated on the James Webb Space Telescope just 3 months prior, a time slot more coveted than a front-row seat at the Oscars. Checking the case was unthinkable. The delicate crystal arrays and micro-calibrated sensors within SARAH were sensitive to the slightest vibration. The cargo hold of a commercial airliner, with its wild temperature fluctuations and the brutal efficiency of baggage handlers, would be a death sentence for the prototype. It would be like asking a concert violinist to check their Stradivarius. She navigated the bustling terminal, her gait confident and purposeful. She was used to being the only person like her in rooms full of academics and engineers. She had navigated the subtle slights, the backhanded compliments, and the outright skepticism, with a grace and resilience that had become her armor. Her work spoke for itself, a loud, clear signal in a world often filled with noise. At Gate E7, the line for Atlantic Airlines Flight 88 to Geneva was a long, snaking entity of weary travelers. Businessmen in wrinkled suits, fiddled with their phones, families tried to corral hyperactive children, and students with oversized backpacks looked ready to sleep on the floor. Evelyn found her place in the Zone 2 boarding line, her Pelican case resting securely at her feet. She ran through the opening of her speech in her head, visualizing the slides, the graphs, the moment she would reveal the faint but unmistakable signature of methane and ozone in the atmosphere of a planet 40 light-years away, a potential indicator of life. It was the kind of discovery that changes textbooks. A man in front of her, a portly executive type with a ruddy face, was wrangling a carry-on bag that was visibly bulging at the seams. He grunted and shoved it into the metal sizer cage next to the agent's podium, barely getting it to fit. The gate agent, a young woman with a practiced, weary smile, waved him through. Evelyn felt a familiar flicker of anxiety. Her case was built to spec, but the perception of technical equipment sometimes triggered an irrational response from airline staff. She had all her documentation ready in a folder, a letter from MIT's Department of Physics, the device specifications, even a TSA notification card for sensitive scientific instruments. She was prepared. She had done this dozens of times before, without incident. The line moved forward. She could see the agent at the podium now. He was a man in his late 20s, with a sharp, angular face and a haircut that was a little too severe. His name tag read Kyle. He carried himself with an air of officious self-importance, the kind often adopted by people given a small kingdom of authority to rule. He scanned boarding passes with a flick of his wrist, his expression a flat line of bored indifference. When Evelyn reached the front, she smiled warmly. "Good morning." Kyle didn't look up from his scanner. "Morning. Boarding pass." She held out her phone. He scanned it, and a green light blinked. He then gestured curtly with his chin towards the Pelican case. "That needs to go in the sizer." "Of course," Evelyn said, her voice even and professional. She lifted the case, which weighed a solid 20 pounds, and slid it easily into the metal frame. It fit perfectly with a good inch to spare on all sides. "See, no problem." She went to retrieve it, but Kyle held up a hand, stopping her. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, finally met hers, and for the first time, his expression shifted from boredom to something else. A flicker of suspicion, a hint of annoyance. "What is that?" he asked, his tone accusatory. "It looks heavy, and it's not a standard suitcase." Evelyn maintained her calm demeanor, the one she had perfected for dealing with grant committees and skeptical male colleagues. "It's a piece of scientific equipment. It's very delicate. It fits the dimensions and the weight allowance, and I have all the necessary—" "I don't care what it is," Kyle interrupted, his voice rising just enough to turn the heads of the people behind her. "Company policy is company policy. We're on a full flight, and the captain has authorized us to check all non-standard and bulky carry-on items to ensure a timely departure. That," he said, pointing a finger at her case, "is non-standard. It has to be checked." A cold knot formed in Evelyn's stomach. This was not the standard procedure. This was a choice. His choice. "I'm afraid that's not possible," she said, her voice firm, but still polite. "The contents are a multi-million-dollar research prototype. They are fragile and cannot be checked. I have documentation from my university explaining the necessity of it being in the cabin." She reached for her folder, but Kyle waved a dismissive hand. "Ma'am, I don't have time to read a novel. Everyone thinks their bag is special. You either check it or you don't fly. The choice is yours." The ultimatum hung in the air, sharp and ugly. The people behind her were shifting, murmuring impatiently. She felt a flush of heat rise in her cheeks, a mix of anger and humiliation. He hadn't even looked at her paperwork. He hadn't listened. He had simply looked at her equipment, and made a judgment. She saw it all in a flash, her keynote speech replaced by a stammering apology. Her data, her discovery trapped in the belly of a plane likely being destroyed with every bump of turbulence. A decade of work undone by a man named Kyle and a little metal cage. She was on the precipice of her greatest achievement, and he was about to shove her off the edge. The space around the boarding gate seemed to shrink, the ambient noise of the terminal focusing into a tight, judgmental hum. Every eye in the vicinity felt like it was on Evelyn. The businessman who had struggled with his own oversized bag was watching with a detached curiosity. A young couple in matching travel hoodies were whispering to each other. Evelyn felt stripped bare, her professional identity as a respected scientist momentarily erased, replaced by the caricature of a difficult passenger. "Sir, with all due respect," she began again, forcing a placating tone into her voice. "This isn't just a special bag. It's a calibrated instrument essential for a time-sensitive international research project. It is approved for cabin transport. If you could just look at the letter from MIT. Ma'am, are you refusing to comply with a crew member's instructions?" Kyle's voice was now laced with a steely threat. He was escalating, leaning on the vague but powerful authority of aviation regulations. He stood taller, puffing his chest out slightly. This was no longer about policy. It was a power play. Evelyn's mind, trained to solve complex orbital mechanics, was now racing to solve a much more frustrating, illogical problem: human prejudice. She saw the familiar lines of dismissal in his face. He wasn't seeing Dr. Evelyn Reed, lead astrophysicist. He was seeing a black woman arguing with him, and he had already decided he would win. "I am not refusing," she said, choosing her words with surgical precision. "I am trying to explain that checking this bag will destroy its contents, which have significant scientific and financial value. Is there a supervisor I could speak to? Perhaps we can find a solution." This was the wrong thing to say. The suggestion that he was incapable of handling the situation himself was a direct challenge to his authority. Kyle's jaw tightened. "I am the lead agent for this flight. There is no one else for you to talk to." He lied. "The solution is simple. The tag is right here." He picked up a bright orange gate check tag and dangled it from his finger like a dead mouse. "We tag it, we put it in the cargo hold, and you get on the plane. End of story." A man standing behind Evelyn, dressed in a sharp, expensive-looking gray suit, cleared his throat. "Excuse me," he said, his voice calm and resonant. "The lady seems to have a legitimate concern. Her case fits in the sizer. I saw it myself. What seems to be the issue?" Kyle shot the man a venomous glare. "The issue, sir, is that this is a full flight and I am making decisions to ensure an on-time departure. This is an operational matter, not a debate." He turned his back on the man, a clear dismissal, and focused again on Evelyn. "Last chance. Are you checking the bag?" Panic began to bubble beneath Evelyn's composed exterior. She could feel the window of opportunity closing. The other passengers in Zone 2 were now being waved past her, shooting her irritated glances. She was holding up the line. She was the problem. Desperation clawed at her. "Please, just listen. My career is in this box. My entire presentation, the data. It's all in there. There is no backup. The damage. Everything is fragile when people don't want to pay for checked baggage." Kyle sneered, the comment dripping with condescension, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. It was a low blow, reframing her professional crisis as a petty attempt to avoid a $50 fee. The injustice of it was a physical blow. She felt the fight drain out of her, Arguing further would only result in her being removed from the flight entirely. She had no choice. She had been boxed in her logic and credentials rendered meaningless. With a deep, shuddering sigh of defeat, she nodded. "Fine." The word was barely a whisper, but Kyle heard it. A triumphant smirk flickered across his lips. He efficiently looped the orange tag around the handle of her Pelican case, scrawling GVA on it with a black marker. He didn't ask for her name or her final destination. He just tagged it. "Thank you for your cooperation," he said, the politeness more insulting than any curse. He took the case from her. For a moment, their hands brushed, and she felt an almost electric jolt of fury. He handled the case with a careless roughness, placing it on the floor behind the podium, with other gate-checked items ready to be tossed onto the baggage cart. Evelyn stood frozen for a second, watching her life's work sitting forlornly on the grubby airport carpet. It looked so vulnerable. She felt a profound sense of loss, as if a part of herself had been amputated. Kyle gestured impatiently towards the jet bridge. "You're holding up the boarding process, ma'am." Numbly, she picked up her backpack, which contained her laptop and a change of clothes now utterly useless for the presentation, and walked down the jet bridge. The cheerful blue and white of the Atlantic Airlines branding felt like a mockery. Each step was heavy. She found her seat 24B, a middle seat, squeezed between a man who was already asleep and snoring softly, and a woman who was typing furiously on her phone. Evelyn slumped into the narrow chair, the thin fabric feeling rough against her skin. She stared blankly at the seat back in front of her, the safety card a blur of meaningless pictograms. She tried to think, to strategize. Could she reconstruct some of the data from memory? No. It was terabytes of complex readings. Could she change her talk to be purely theoretical? It would be a professional embarrassment. She was the keynote. They were expecting a breakthrough, not a book report. Through the small oval window, she saw the baggage carts being loaded. She watched her heart pounding as a handler in a high-visibility vest picked up a familiar black Pelican case. He swung it with a casual arcing motion up onto the conveyor belt, leading into the plane's cargo hold. It landed with a heavy, sickening thud. Evelyn flinched, as if she'd been struck. The sound echoed in her mind a death knell for CARH, and she feared for her career. The cabin door was sealed with a heavy clunk. The engines began to whine, the plane vibrating as it pushed back from the gate. As they taxied towards the runway, Evelyn closed her eyes, a single hot tear of pure rage and frustration escaping and tracing a path down her cheek. She wasn't just angry at Kyle. She was angry at a system that so often empowered mediocrity and prejudice, allowing a petty tyrant at a boarding gate to single-handedly jeopardize a major scientific discovery. The plane accelerated, lifting into the sky, and with it, Evelyn felt her hopes plummeting back to Earth. 6 hours into the flight, the cabin was a dimly lit cavern of recycled air and quiet murmurs. The dinner service had come and gone, leaving behind the lingering smell of foil-wrapped chicken and the crinkle of plastic waste. Most passengers were asleep, their heads lolling at awkward angles, or lost in the blue glow of their seatback screens. Evelyn had not slept. She hadn't even pretended to. She had stared out the window for hours, watching the deep velvet black of the sky, a universe of stars visible that she had dedicated her life to understanding, yet it brought her no comfort. It only served as a stark reminder of what she had lost in the cargo hold below. Her mind was a maelstrom of frantic, useless calculations. She had tried to access her university's cloud server via the plane's sluggish Wi-Fi, hoping a fraction of the raw data had been backed up before she left. The connection was agonizingly slow, and the login portal kept timing out. Even if she could get in, she knew the primary analysis files, the ones processed by SARAH's proprietary software, existed in only one place, the solid-state drive inside the now-abused Pelican case. She had drafted and deleted a dozen emails to the symposium organizers. How do you explain that your groundbreaking discovery was thwarted by a gate agent's power trip? It sounded like a flimsy, unprofessional excuse. Dear esteemed colleagues, due to an unforeseen baggage handling issue. It was pathetic. Defeated, she finally paid the exorbitant fee for the premium Wi-Fi package, hoping a faster connection might at least let her download some of her theoretical papers to salvage a fraction of her talk. As the connection finally stabilized, a cascade of notifications flooded her laptop screen. Most were standard emails from university listservs, but one stood out. The subject line was a jolt of pure adrenaline urgent. JWST anomaly. Need SARAH. Data now. Dr. Eris Thorne. Evelyn's blood ran cold. Dr. Eris Thorne was not just some colleague. He was the director of the Exoplanet Exploration Program at NASA headquarters in Washington, D.C. He was a living legend in the field, a man whose name was on textbooks she had studied as an undergraduate. He was the one who had personally signed off on her observation time on the James Webb Space Telescope. He did not send casual emails. Her hands trembled as she clicked it open. The email was brief-typed with a sense of frantic urgency that was palpable even in text. Evelyn, unforeseen calibration drift on JWST's NIR spec instrument. We're getting ghost signals on the 3.3 micrometer band, looks like methane, but the spectral signature is distorted. It's affecting the entire TRAPPIST-1 observation block. My team thinks it's a polarization artifact from the primary mirror's coating at cryogenic temps. We can't correct for it with our standard algorithms. Your paper on SARAH's differential polarization method is the only thing that comes to mind. We need your algorithm. More importantly, we need your raw polarimetric data from your observation run to create a baseline. This is mission critical. The window to recalibrate is closing in hours. Call me immediately. Secure line details attached. Evelyn read the email 3 times, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was the best and worst news of her life, delivered simultaneously. Her theory was correct. So correct that it was the only hope for a $10 billion space telescope. The anomaly they were seeing was precisely the kind of subtle distortion SARAH was designed to detect and filter. Her work was not just important, it was vital, and it was all in a box being treated like a piece of luggage in the unpressurized, freezing cold cargo bay. A wave of nausea washed over her. She pulled up the secure communication app Dr. Thorne had linked to. It was a NASA-encrypted VoIP service. She entered the credentials, her fingers fumbling on the trackpad. The app initialized, and she pressed the call button. For a moment, there was only the digital silence of the connection. Then a voice, crisp and authoritative, cut through the air. "Thorne. Dr. Thorne, this is Evelyn Reed." "Evelyn. Thank God. Did you get my email? We're flying blind here. The entire exoplanet team at Goddard is in a panic. The data stream from Webb is practically unusable. We need your algorithm." "Dr. Thorne," Evelyn said, her voice tight with stress. "I have the algorithm, and I have the data, but there's a problem, a significant problem." She could hear the background noise of a busy control room on his end, other voices' telemetry readouts. "What kind of problem?" Thorne asked, his voice sharpening with concern. "Is your drive corrupted?" Evelyn took a deep breath, the humiliation of the situation flooding back now, magnified by the astronomical stakes. "No, sir. The drive is fine. It's inside the sensor prototype. The whole unit is in a Pelican case." She paused, forcing the next words out. "And the gate agent for my flight forced me to check it. It's in the cargo hold." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the hum of the Rolls-Royce engines outside Evelyn's window. She could almost hear the gears turning in Dr. Thorne's mind, processing the absurdity of what she had just said. When he finally spoke, his voice was dangerously calm. "Let me be perfectly clear, Dr. Reed. You are telling me that the only existing baseline data that can potentially correct a critical fault on the James Webb Space Telescope is currently in the baggage hold of a commercial airliner somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean." "Yes, sir," she whispered. The reality of it, verbalized so starkly, was horrifying. "What airline are you on?" Thorne's voice had shifted. The academic curiosity was gone, replaced by the tone of a commander facing a crisis. "Atlantic Airlines, Flight 88 from Boston to Geneva." And the agent's name, the airport. The agent's name was Kyle, at Boston Logan Gate E7. Another pause. She heard him covering the receiver, his voice muffled but urgent as he spoke to someone else in the room. "Get me the CEO of Atlantic Airlines on the phone. I don't care what time it is. Get me the head of FAA operations for the Northeast Corridor, and get me a direct line to the cockpit of Atlantic Flight 88. Now." He came back on the line to her. "Evelyn, stay calm. We are going to fix this. But you need to understand the gravity of the situation. This isn't just about your presentation anymore. You are now a critical NASA asset. And so is your bag." Evelyn leaned her head against the cool plastic of the airplane wall, the sheer whiplash of the last few hours making her dizzy. Just hours ago, she was a humiliated academic. Now she was a critical NASA asset. The turbulence she was feeling had nothing to do with the air currents at 35,000 feet. It was the feeling of her entire world and a significant portion of the international scientific community's hopes being violently shaken. The fate of a mission to the stars now hinged on the fate of her checked luggage, the call with Dr. Thorne was like a switch being flipped, transforming Evelyn from a passenger into the central node of a rapidly escalating international incident. The abstract disappointment of her ruined presentation had morphed into a concrete, high-stakes crisis. "All right, Evelyn." Thorne's voice crackled through her noise-canceling headphones, a beacon of command amidst the cabin's quiet hum. "Here's what's going to happen. I have my people patching me through to your flight deck. The captain will be notified of the situation. I need you to explain the technical details to me now so I can relay the essentials. What are the operational tolerances of the CRH unit? Specifically, what are its vulnerabilities to temperature and depressurization?" Evelyn's mind, which had been spinning with anxiety, snapped into focus. This was her element. Data, specifications, problems to be solved. "The unit is housed in a standard Pelican 1510 case, which is watertight, but not airtight," she began, her voice gaining strength and clarity. "It's not designed for the cargo hold environment. The main vulnerability is the cryogenic cooling system for the primary sensor. It's a closed-loop system, but a rapid drop to the hold's ambient temperature, which can be as low as -50 degrees Celsius, could cause the coolant lines to contract and crack. If the seals break, the sensor is useless." "And the vibrations from baggage handling?" Thorne pressed. "The internal foam is custom-cut and shock-absorbent, but it's designed to protect against accidental drops not being thrown onto a conveyor belt and crushed under 100 other bags. The alignment of the polarizing filters is measured in microns. A significant jolt could decalibrate the entire array. It would be catastrophic." She could hear Thorne relaying the information. "Listen up, the package contains a cryo-cooled sensor. Low temp and shock are the primary threats. We need to know if the cargo hold on that aircraft is temperature-controlled." Evelyn felt a new surge of panic. Standard cargo holds were not. Only specific compartments for transporting live animals were. The chances that her bag tagged at the last second had ended up in such a compartment were effectively zero. A flight attendant, a kind-faced woman named Susan, who had served her dinner earlier, suddenly appeared at her elbow. Her expression was one of bewildered urgency. "Dr. Reed," she asked, her voice low. "The captain would like to speak with you. He's on the line from the cockpit." She held out the crew's satellite phone, a chunky, unfamiliar piece of hardware. Evelyn nodded, ending the call with Thorne, and taking the receiver. "This is Dr. Reed." "Dr. Reed, this is Captain Miller," a deep, calm voice responded. "I've just been briefed by a gentleman from NASA. He tells me we have a piece of mission-critical equipment in our forward cargo hold. Can you confirm this?" The captain's tone was one of professional disbelief. In his 30 years of flying, this was clearly a first. "Yes, Captain, that's correct," Evelyn said. "It's a black Pelican case gate checked under my name. And he's telling me this equipment is essential to the James Webb Space Telescope. Is that correct?" "Yes, Captain, it is." There was a moment of silence. The captain was likely imagining the report he would have to file. "Well, ma'am," he said, the gravity of the situation dawning on him, "I'm afraid I can't do much about the temperature or the turbulence from up here. The forward hold is not heated, but what I can do is ensure that upon landing your case is treated like a human organ for transplant. I'm communicating with our ground operations in Geneva right now. They will have a special crew ready to meet the aircraft. The bag will not go to the main carousel. It will be hand-delivered directly to you at the gate." "Thank you, Captain," Evelyn said, a sliver of hope returning. "Thank you." She handed the phone back to Susan, who was looking at her with a newfound respect and awe. The passenger next to her, the woman who had been typing on her phone, had her earbuds out and was now staring at Evelyn with wide, curious eyes. The bubble of anonymity had popped. Evelyn reconnected with Dr. Thorne. "The captain is aware," she told him. "He's arranging a priority retrieval in Geneva." "Good. That's one fire put out," Thorne said, though he didn't sound relieved. "Now for the other one. My office has made contact with the executive suite at Atlantic Airlines. I believe a Mr. Robert Henderson, their chief operating officer, is being woken up as we speak. He's about to have a very, very bad night." Evelyn's eyes widened. Mr. Henderson? The man in the sharp gray suit who had tried to intervene on her behalf at the gate. She hadn't caught his name then, but the face was unmistakable. He wasn't just a concerned passenger. He was a senior executive of the entire airline, and he had witnessed the whole thing. He had seen Kyle's dismissiveness, his refusal to even look at her paperwork, his smug satisfaction. "Dr. Thorne," Evelyn said slowly, "I think there was a witness, a man who tried to help. He might be an executive with the airline." "We know," Thorne replied. "He apparently called his head of corporate security from the plane before we even got to his boss. The agent who denied your carry-on, an employee named Kyle Peterson, is about to become the subject of a major internal investigation. It seems he didn't just break protocol, he lied about his authority and flagrantly disregarded regulations regarding the transport of sensitive scientific equipment. Henderson's preliminary report states the agent's actions appeared to be arbitrary and potentially discriminatory." The word discriminatory hit Evelyn with surprising force. It was what she had felt deep in her gut, but hearing it validated by a NASA director quoting an airline COO made it real in a way her own feelings hadn't. Kyle hadn't just been a stickler for the rules. He had targeted her. "What happens now?" Evelyn asked, her mind still trying to catch up to the rapidly changing reality. "Now we pray," Thorne said, his voice grim. "We pray your instrument survives the flight. As soon as you land, you will be met by our European Space Agency counterparts. They'll escort you to a secure facility at CERN. We'll set up a live feed to Goddard. You'll have every resource you need. You're going to have to perform a full diagnostic on SARA the moment you get it. If it's damaged, you'll have to try and salvage the data and recalibrate it on the fly. Your keynote is canceled. You have a new job, Dr. Reed. You're saving the web." The call ended, leaving Evelyn in the surreal quiet of the airplane cabin. She was no longer a victim of a bureaucratic blunder. She was now the protagonist in a high-tech thriller. The call hadn't just come from a superior. It felt like a call from Olympus, a directive from the gods of science themselves. And she, a mortal who had been humbled just hours before, was now tasked with fixing their greatest creation. The pressure was immense, but for the first time since boarding, she felt a surge of power. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. While Dr. Evelyn Reed was being deputized as NASA's last hope over the Atlantic, a different kind of storm was brewing on the ground. At the Boston Logan International Airport headquarters of Atlantic Airlines, the night shift was usually a quiet affair. But tonight, the operations center was a hive of frantic activity, lit by the panicked glow of computer monitors. The first call had come from the FAA, which was like getting a call from God and finding out he was angry. The second call, patched through from an irate Chief Operating Officer Robert Henderson vacationing in Switzerland, had been far worse. "Find him," Henderson had roared over the speakerphone, his voice distorted with rage and the static of a transatlantic call. "Find the gate agent from Flight 88. Kyle Peterson. I want him in my office. No, I want him in a conference room with our head of legal and HR the second his shift ends. Do not let him leave the airport." Daniel Cartwright, the overnight duty manager, was sweating through his uniform shirt. He was a man accustomed to dealing with lost luggage and catering screw-ups, not international incidents involving NASA. "Yes, Mr. Henderson. Right away, Mr. Henderson." On another line, a logistics coordinator was talking to the head of ground services in Geneva. "No, you don't understand. This isn't a priority bag. This is a do not breathe on it bag. We need a dedicated team to meet the aircraft. No conveyor belts, no carts, unless it's a velvet-lined chariot. I don't care what it takes. That bag gets hand-carried to the passenger the moment she deplanes." The flight manifest for AA-88 was pulled up on a massive screen. Evelyn Reed's name was highlighted in flashing red. Next to it, a new note had been added in all caps, NASA critical asset. Extreme care required. Cartwright paced the room, rubbing his temples. How did this happen? How does a gate agent unilaterally decide to check a piece of equipment that could bring down the wrath of the entire United States government on us? Did he not see the documentation? A junior staffer, a young woman named Chloe, spoke up hesitantly from her workstation. "Sir, I pulled the CCTV footage from Gate E7. "Put it on the main screen," Cartwright barked. The grainy video filled the monitor. They saw Dr. Reed, calm and professional, placing her case in the sizer. They saw it fit. They saw her try to show Kyle her folder of paperwork. And they saw Kyle wave it away, his body language a symphony of arrogance and dismissal. They saw the man Cartwright now knew to be their own COO. Robert Henderson stepped forward to question the agent. They saw Kyle shut him down with undisguised contempt. Finally, they saw him tag the bag and toss it carelessly behind the counter. The room was silent. The evidence was damning and irrefutable. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a judgment call made under pressure. It was a clear abuse of power. "He lied," Chloe whispered, horrified. "He told her he was the lead agent and there was no supervisor." Cartwright's face was pale. "He didn't just lie to a passenger. He lied to our COO, and in doing so he may have just destroyed a multi-million-dollar piece of scientific equipment and made an enemy of NASA. He turned to Chloe. Where is Peterson now? His shift ended 20 minutes ago. Security logs show he clocked out and is heading for the employee parking garage. No, Cartwright said, grabbing a radio. Security, this is Cartwright in Ops. I need you to intercept an employee in the Level 4 parking garage. Name is Kyle Peterson. He drives a blue Honda Civic. Detain him. Tell him he needs to report to the main office for a mandatory debrief. Use whatever language you need to, but do not let him leave this airport. The call went out, and across the airport, a quiet hunt began. Meanwhile, the ripple effect was spreading. The legal department was in a frenzy trying to assess the potential liability. Could NASA sue them? Could Dr. Reed? The damage to the instrument was unknown, but the damage to Atlantic Airlines' reputation was already catastrophic. Their contract for transporting government and military personnel was suddenly looking very precarious. The communications team was drafting emergency press statements, trying to spin a narrative that didn't make them look incompetent and discriminatory. How do you apologize for nearly derailing a mission to find alien life because your employee had an attitude problem in the cockpit of Flight 88? Captain Miller had made a personal announcement over the PA system, though he kept the details vague. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to the sensitive nature of some cargo on board, we have been asked to ensure the smoothest possible landing in Geneva. We appreciate your cooperation. The message meant little to most passengers, but for Evelyn, it was another sign of the massive machine that had been activated on her behalf. The flight attendants were now treating her with a reverent deference, offering her drinks, snacks, and pillows as if she were royalty. Susan, the flight attendant, leaned in at one point and whispered, "We're all rooting for you, Doctor." The shift was profound. She had boarded the plane as a problem passenger, an obstacle to an on-time departure. She was now the flight's most precious cargo. The entire apparatus of a multinational corporation was now bending over backwards to undo the damage done by one man. And as Flight 88 continued its journey through the darkness, a mayday call had been sent out not for a failing engine or a cabin depressurization, but for a single black Pelican case tumbling through the freezing void of the cargo hold, carrying the secrets of the stars within it. Kyle Peterson whistled a tuneless melody as he walked through the cavernous concrete expanse of the employee parking garage. His shift was over, and he felt the familiar satisfaction of a job done. In his mind, he hadn't been a bully. He had been efficient. He had enforced the rules, kept the boarding process moving, and dealt with a difficult passenger who thought she was above them. The woman with the science box. He snorted to himself. My career is in this box. So dramatic. He'd seen it all before. Everyone had a story. His job was to ignore the stories and load the plane. He clicked the remote to unlock his decade-old Honda Civic, the car's cheerful chirp echoing in the quiet garage. He tossed his work bag onto the passenger seat and was about to get in when two airport security vehicles, their yellow lights flashing silently, pulled up, boxing him in. Two uniformed security officers stepped out. One was a burly older man with a weary face. The other was younger, more rigid. Kyle Peterson, the older officer asked, his voice flat. Yeah. What's going on? Kyle asked, a flicker of annoyance in his tone. Was this about a parking permit? You need to come with us, sir. The duty manager needs to see you back in the main office. My shift is over, Kyle protested. It can wait until tomorrow. I'm afraid it can't, sir, the younger officer said, his hand resting near his belt. The implication was clear. This was not a request. A knot of unease began to form in Kyle's stomach. This was not normal procedure. He was escorted into the back of one of the vehicles, a silent, uncomfortable ride back to the terminal building he had just left. They didn't take him to the usual HR offices. Instead, they led him down a long, sterile corridor to a corporate conference room he had only ever seen in training videos. The room was cold, dominated by a long, polished mahogany table. Seated at the table were Daniel Cartwright, the night manager looking pale and stressed, a stern-looking woman in a severe business suit whom Kyle recognized as Eleanor Vance, the head of human resources, and a man in an impeccably tailored suit he didn't recognize who was staring at him with undisguised contempt. "Mr. Peterson, please have a seat," Vance said, her voice devoid of any warmth. Kyle sat, his earlier smugness evaporating, replaced by a growing dread. "We need to discuss an incident that occurred during the boarding of Atlantic Flight 88 to Geneva this evening." Vance began, her eyes like chips of ice. "The flight boarded on time," Kyle said defensively. "There were no incidents." "Really?" The man in the expensive suit spoke for the first time. "Because from where I was standing, I witnessed a major incident. I witnessed you refusing to look at a passenger's documentation lying about your authority and forcing her to check a piece of irreplaceable scientific equipment." Kyle stared at the man, and then with a sickening lurch in his gut, he recognized him. The gray suit, the calm, resonant voice, the passenger who had tried to intervene. Daniel Cartwright leaned forward. "Kyle, this is Robert Henderson. He's our Chief Operating Officer." Kyle felt all the air leave his lungs. It was as if the floor had dropped out from under him. He tried to speak, but only a dry croak emerged. "Let's not waste any more time," Henderson said, his voice cold as steel. "On the screen, please." The large monitor at the end of the room lit up with the CCTV footage from Gate E7. Kyle was forced to watch his own actions stripped of his self-serving internal monologue. He watched himself dismiss Dr. Reed. He watched himself lie. He watched his own arrogant smirk as he tagged the bag. In the sterile quiet of the conference room, his actions looked petty cruel and profoundly unprofessional. "Now," Henderson continued as the video ended, "let me tell you what you have done, Mr. Peterson. The passenger you harassed, Dr. Evelyn Reed, is a leading astrophysicist. The science box you so cavalierly forced into the hold contains a prototype sensor. That sensor and the data it holds is currently the only thing that can fix a critical malfunction on the $10 billion James Webb Space Telescope." Kyle's face had gone from pale to ashen. This couldn't be real. It was some kind of bizarre nightmare. "We have been contacted by NASA. We have been contacted by the FAA. I have personally been on the phone with the director of the Exoplanet Exploration Program, who wants to know why an Atlantic Airlines employee was allowed to potentially sabotage a mission of global scientific importance. So I'll ask you, Mr. Peterson, why was that?" I was following policy." Kyle stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "The flight was full. I was making a judgment call." "Policy," Vance cut in, her voice sharp. She slid a thick binder across the table. "Our policy section 7 subsection C clearly states that documented sensitive scientific or medical equipment when fitting within size regulations is to be given priority for in-cabin stowage. You were shown the documentation. You refused to look at it. You didn't make a judgment call. You made a choice. Why?" Kyle looked from face to face, seeing no sympathy, no escape. The walls were closing in. He had no answer. He didn't know why. Was it because she was a woman? Because she was black? Because she was an academic who he assumed was entitled? He had just seen someone he thought he could push around, and he had pushed. He had enjoyed the feeling of power. He couldn't say that, so he said nothing. Your employment with Atlantic Airlines is suspended effective immediately pending termination, Vance stated flatly. You will be escorted from the premises. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you. You are not to have any contact with any other employees. A full investigation will follow, and depending on the condition of Dr. Reed's equipment upon landing, we will be exploring our legal options to recoup any damages from you personally for gross negligence. Gross negligence. The words echoed in Kyle's head. The secure, predictable world he had built for himself, his job, his authority, his sense of rightness was crumbling into dust around him. He had been the gatekeeper, the one who decided who got on and what they could carry. Now, he was being cast out. As security escorted a stunned and silent Kyle from the room, Henderson let out a long, weary sigh. This is a PR disaster, he said to the room at large. Get our communications team on a plane to Geneva. I want them to be there when Dr. Reed lands. I want a public apology drafted. And I want to offer her a lifetime of free first-class flights, though I doubt she'll ever want to fly with us again. He looked at the frozen image of Evelyn Reed on the CCTV screen, her face a mask of dignified frustration. We didn't just mishandle a bag, he said, his voice heavy with regret. We failed a brilliant woman, and we're going to spend a long time trying to make it right. For Kyle Peterson, however, there would be no making it right. His unraveling was complete. The descent into Geneva was the smoothest Captain Miller had ever orchestrated, touching the Airbus A330 down with the delicacy of a falling feather. The moment the seatbelt sign pinged off, Evelyn was escorted to the front of the plane, bypassing the other passengers. At the bottom of the aircraft stairs, a delegation waited on the tarmac beside a sleek black Mercedes. Just as she stepped onto the asphalt, a ground crew vehicle sped towards them. A handler jumped out carrying the black Pelican case as if it were a bomb, a fresh gash scarring one of its corners. He presented it to her with a breathless apology. Evelyn accepted it without a word, her expression unreadable. She was whisked away to CERN, the European Organization for Nuclear Research, and rushed into a prepared laboratory. A team of engineers stood by, and on a massive screen, the anxious face of Dr. Eris Thorne was already waiting via a live feed from NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center. Evelyn, what's the status? Thorne asked, his voice tight. I have the case, she replied, placing it on a steel work table. With the entire room holding its breath, she popped the latches. The hiss of equalizing air was a good sign. She lifted the lid. Superficially, SRAH looked intact, but Evelyn knew the real damage would be microscopic. I need to run a full diagnostic, she announced, her hands flying as she connected the device to the lab's equipment. The initial checks were promising the coolant lines had survived the freeze, but then she found it. The impact from the cargo hold had caused a 0.02 micron shift in the alignment of the polarizing filters. It was a tiny deviation, but enough to render any data completely useless. There's a misalignment, she reported grimly. I can try to recalibrate, but it's going to be delicate. What followed was a masterclass in scientific brilliance. For 3 hours, Evelyn worked with a focus that was almost supernatural, using CERN's laser tools to perform the scientific equivalent of brain surgery. Finally, she was done. Calibration complete, she announced, sweat beading on her forehead. Now for the data. She slid the encrypted drive into a reader. The files were there uncorrupted. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the labs in both Geneva and Maryland. She quickly uploaded her raw data and ran her proprietary algorithm against the corrupted signal from the James Webb Space Telescope. On the screen, The distorted, noisy data from the telescope snapped into a sharp, clear signature. The evidence of methane and ozone potential biosignatures on a distant world was undeniable. The control room at Goddard exploded in cheers. "You did it, Evelyn," Dr. Thorne said, his voice thick with emotion. "You saved the mission." The story inevitably leaked, and the media frenzy was immediate. Headlines worldwide told the tale of the brilliant scientist who saved $1 billion telescope from an airline's blunder. Evelyn Reed became an icon overnight, lauded for her genius and her grace under pressure. In an act of profound corporate contrition, Atlantic Airlines fired Kyle Peterson, issued a formal public apology, and donated $10 million to a STEM scholarship for women of color in Evelyn's name. Evelyn, initially overwhelmed, embraced her newfound platform, becoming a passionate advocate for diversity in the sciences. She had set out for Geneva to present a discovery. Instead, she had become one. Her star, once nearly extinguished by petty bureaucracy in an airport terminal, had been realigned, burning brighter than ever before. Dr. Evelyn Reed's incredible journey reminds us that brilliance and resilience can triumph over even the most frustrating and unjust obstacles. Her story isn't just about a flight or a piece of equipment. It's a powerful testament to the impact one person's prejudice can have and how integrity and expertise can ultimately win the day. It's a stark reminder that behind every person is a story, a purpose, and a potential you can't see from the surface. The Kyle Petersons of the world wield small moments of power, but the Evelyn Reeds change the universe. Stories like this matter. They shine a light on the everyday biases that can have astronomical consequences and celebrate the heroes who overcome them. If this story resonated with you, if it made you angry, hopeful, or inspired, please help us share it. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more true stories of struggle, karma, and incredible triumph. What you do matters. Thank you for listening.